And we are live at the Catholic Leadership Conference. I'm Doug Keck with Bookmark, and our guest author is Mr. Matt Fradd, author of Delivered, True Stories of Men and Women Who Turned from Porn to Purity, and it's published by Catholic Answers Press. Nice to meet you, Matt.
Good to meet you.
It's the first time we got to meet and talk here at the Catholic Leadership Conference. Are you working with Catholic Answers now, then?
I was working with Catholic Answers for the past 2.5 years, and then about 8 months ago now I left. I now work for a group called Covenant Eyes, which is an apostolate dedicated to helping families protect their families from pornography.
Okay.
So I travel and speak primarily on this topic now.
Well, obviously you're not from Southern California.
That's
originally.
Right. No, Massachusetts.
I would say Australia.
Yeah, born in Australia, met a beautiful American woman and got married in 2006.
Did you meet her when you were in the States or were you in Australia?
I met her in Ireland, actually.
Oh, really?
Would you believe? We were doing ministry with Net Ministries of Canada.
Sure, okay.
And so we helped establish the office there, and so I met her then. And
so has your faith always been important to you? I mean, the fact that you would join NET or do those kinds of things?
Not at all. No, I actually converted to Christ, I'd say, at the age of 17 at World Youth Day in Rome. But prior to that, I would have said I was an agnostic and didn't have much time for Christians.
And what made you decide to go to Rome?
It was a free trip to Rome.
Free trip to Rome? Thought it would be a nice party?
Yes, I did. That's exactly what I thought. My mum said, well, John Paul II will be there. I said, but that's okay. It'll still be good.
Right, still be fun, right?
And I had a great time. The Lord changed my life.
Was there one particular thing that struck you? What was the...
There is a number of moments, but I'd say the one thing that struck me was the confidence, intelligence, and kindness of those who I went with. These were the first young Catholics that I knew who took their faith seriously, and they were kind and good people and very confident, and I wanted that.
Now, did you have any religion at all? I mean, had you been baptized?
I was baptized, but I
were you a Catholic or?
Baptized Catholic,
okay.
gave up
Just
my faith though. Yeah, I thought there was probably no God, and it was like a fairy tale parents invented to make children behave. That was my idea.
It's not?
It's not my idea
okay,
anymore.
Good. Okay, good. Okay, just so everybody knows, it's definitely not a fairy tale. Now let me ask you, but why writing about pornography or dealing with porn? Obviously we know it's an issue. Unfortunately, it's a big issue. But why is that the area that you're talking about? Well,
it's something I encountered at the age of 8. As technology advanced, so too did my use of pornography. And only after having become Catholic was I incentivized to stop. I sort of always knew it was a unmanly thing to be involved in, but I stopped. And after finding a good amount of freedom from this stuff, I decided not many other people were speaking about this topic, so I began to.
We kind of live in this world today in some ways where we're depersonalized anyway.
Yeah.
We communicate, we're not communicating directly.
Yeah.
And in some ways I wonder, and again, I always tell people I worked on the Playboy channel years ago.
Yeah.
And in some ways it's a way for people to have their fun without having to pay any of the dues.
That's a good way to put it.
You know what I mean? In the sense of I can have this person who I can objectivize and use the way I want them to, and I don't have to give anything.
I can have my pleasure without my sacrifice.
Right.
Sort of like contraception.
Right.
Yeah.
As opposed to, a normal, healthy relationship which comes out of a sacramental marriage, in which case, but that has demands on it. Because I have to be loving when I don't feel loving.
Yes.
I have to deal at times with things that I'm not happy about. I have to sacrifice for my wife and my family so that intimacy ultimately is available to me.
And with pornography, I can feel like the hero without having to sacrifice anything.
Right.
So we might go for peace because we feel agitated, but we end up more guilt-ridden. We might go for freedom, but we end up enslaved. We might go for intimacy, but we end up just lonely. So it doesn't deliver.
Is that your experience?
That was my experience, yeah. And those I speak with, it's their experience also. That pornography doesn't give us what it promises. In fact, it leaves us with less than we began with.
Is it also the experience of the people in this book and your own that it's always the kind of thing, at least that's what I saw at the progression of when we started working on things like the Playboy channel, it always had to get harder.
Yes.
It always had to be ratcheted up and got stranger and weirder.
Yes.
In order for people to get, it's like drugs.
Yes.
They need to raise up the level of the narcotic to get the same high.
And modern neuroscience is explaining why that's the case. I won't go into it in all that greater depth, but yes, essentially when one becomes addicted to pornography, they've reset the pleasure thermostat in the brain, and they now need more types of that drug and harder types of that drug just to feel normal.
Right.
But the good news is we've seen that with time healing is available, and so that's good news too.
Right, and also I think it explains to some degree why you end up with this really that it gets, as it gets harder, it also gets more distorted and stranger.
Yes.
Because it has to be, and
Yes.
almost to the level of bizarreness in many
Indeed.
cases. These things, people, if you would ask, you know, who would never have
That's
thought
right. Yeah.
that they would find themselves in this position, suddenly
Yeah.
they're
Well,
just
I even
there.
suspect those who look at child pornography, God have mercy.
Right.
I'm sure the majority of them didn't wake up one day and think, I might check that out. I
Right.
imagine it was progressive, as you say.
Right, exactly, because it gets a little stranger or
Yeah.
something else like this. True stories, men and women. Let me ask you, one of the things that you think about a lot of these things, we think, is it a male-only thing? And we think of pornography, we really think about men objectifying women.
Yes.
You know, dad with the computer upstairs, or the kind of the advisory to a family. Keep the computer, if you're going to have a computer on the internet, keep it in a family room or some place where people don't have the ability to be tempted to do something somebody can't see them do. You know what I mean? But is it just men, or is it also women?
Traditionally, it has been viewed as such, and there's certainly some truth in there. I think more men fall to the sin of pornography than women. But given how pervasive it is, it certainly is not the case that women do not also struggle with visual pornography. And I find that whenever I speak about this to young men and young women in high schools, for example, I'll have always at least a young girl come up to me and say, thank you for talking about this. Because pornography is an isolating sin. We do it and we feel all the more isolated. How much more isolating would it be if you're a young woman who's continually told, oh no, this isn't something you should be struggling with, this is a male thing. So in my book I have two stories of young women. One of them is Audrey Assad, who's a famous Catholic musician, for the first time sharing her story in there. Yeah, so women also do struggle.
And then you yourself wrote the one, Interviews with June?
Yeah, June was we actually were her youth ministers in Ireland, where I used to live with my wife. And after high school, June left for Great Britain, where she was studying, and she became a stripper. And so we got in touch with her and sort of asked why she was doing this. And
was it something in our youth ministry that led
yes,
you this
hopefully
way?
not. But thank God we were able to give her the money she needed to get out.
And that was what it was. It was a money issue.
It was a money issue, primarily. Yeah, and there's just a lack of self-esteem, lack of joy issue that led her there as well. And we were, by God's grace, were able to get her to the sacrament of confession also. She talks about that.
Now, your foreword is written by Jason Everett. Everybody at EWTN knows Jason for the years he's been on, and the fine work he's done in the chastity areas and purity areas. He kind of starts off in an interesting way. He talks about the movie 127 Hours, where that guy gets hurt, and he says that the reason where it gets crushed, and he ultimately has to amputate his arm in order for him to get free. And he said, there's two reasons why I began a book on pornography with Ralston Starr. The first is because I believe that when it comes to the topic of pornography, countless vocations hang in the balance. How many potential marriages have been lost because potential suitors have been so entrenched in laptop fantasies to bar the demands of commitment and the fear of rejection by a flesh and blood female, which is kind of what we were talking about there. The second reason I've used the 127, the metaphor for 127, is because many people feel crushed under the weight of their addiction to pornography and have tried countless methods to free themselves. And I was thinking about what you were saying. You think about pornography so much as it's an aloneness. It's a thing by yourself. And I think, unfortunately, when we have those sins to some degree that are our own, that's when the devil really goes to work on you, because then he starts to work on, you think you're supposed to be a good person. Other people think you're really not that kind of person. You know that about yourself, and it works on you not only in that, but in other things in your life, I would think.
Yeah, indeed, and I think this is why accountability is so critical. Or else we just end up living these lives of duplicity, and accountability through good friends, through the sacrament of confession, through accountability software like Covenant Eyes, I think can help shed light into that dark corner of our lives, and so we can have good people remind us of who we are and who we desire to be, and why pornography
and what
isn't
God
going
wants
to
for us,
achieve
really,
that.
in
That
our
also,
life.
yes.
And certainly that's where I think our Blessed Mother comes in as well. While pornography, and this is what Jason was saying, and all sin for that matter, leads to isolation, love draws us towards union. So that's what happens. People think they're getting a relationship, but they're getting more and more isolated. And again, like we were saying, in a sense, that's the time when you're separated, that the devil works on you.
I think so.
If you've wavered between loving the prison of lust and longing to be freed from it, you're not alone. The book you're holding contains riveting stories of individuals who have fought the same battle. These testimonies are compelling because none of the individuals seem superhuman in his or her ability to conquer the lust of genuine. When someone is addicted, like in this way, to pornography, is it like being an alcoholic? I mean, is it this kind of thing that you know, they have to constantly be aware, maybe you're in your own situation, that I can be tempted to this again,
yes,
and that I could find myself going back down the same path over again?
I think so. So for example, for me, this is something I've been free of for a long time now, but that doesn't mean there isn't a weakness there that I'm responsible for, and therefore need to be aware of those areas in my life that could be triggers, as they say. And so I need to be careful.
It's in the introduction, and you were talking about, and you alluded to it kind of when you were about 8 years old, I think, whatever it was when you first saw it. And then you were also in a situation too, because you had your dad was, you know.
Dad sort of said, he found my stash of Playboys and Penthouses and sort of said, well done, mate, don't let your mother find out. And
exactly.
My dad's a good man, and I think he just didn't want me to feel ashamed, and did the best he could.
Right, and there was a certain aspect of the culture with men with their sons. You know.
Yes, and I had a grade 8 teacher in a Catholic school who told us that it was acceptable. So we were just getting this message from every angle.
Well, it's only natural, and people for a long time, I know certainly in the 60s and 70s, this idea, well, you need to have these outcomes because otherwise people find it in more, you know, delinquent ways or do things.
Yes.
But we find that it doesn't,
let's say something really about that.
Way, you know?
Sometimes you'll hear people say if people didn't have pornography, they'd end up repressed and neurotic, which to me seems a lot like saying if people weren't obese, they'd be anorexic. And you think, well, actually, aren't there more than two options, like health? And so I think this is where the virtue of chastity comes in, which enables me to love in accord with my dignity and according to the demands of love.
Well, it's also the difference between self-control and repression. You know, sometimes those things get lost in our society. People don't have that problem when they're talking about health. They don't say because you're working out all the time and watching what you eat, you're repressing your need to have chocolate. You'd say you're showing good self-control. But except when it kind of goes the other way. This struck me, and I think something that I experienced myself when I was working in television. It said, you'll see how porn emasculates men by robbing them of their God-given masculinity and leaving them as mere consumers rather than providers. And this is especially how it degrades women by reducing the mystery and beauty of femininity to a collection of body parts and making them think something be used. And that's definitely that objectification. And I saw that even just from people working on the channel and how it affected you without even going out of your way. And this was in the age before there was, you know, internet pornography.
Before you could have pornography in your pocket.
Right.
You know, a phone amounts to a potential X-rated movie theater unless you have the appropriate filters.
This was another thing you point out. No one ever told me there might be something wrong with pornography. In fact, you were saying, one of your teachers kind of alluded to the fact that it was actually maybe a good release for young men your age or something. Not my parents, not my priest. Now that's interesting, not my priest. Is that because they just didn't talk about those things?
Yeah, they didn't speak about it. I never heard about it from the pulpit, as I think many people can relate to. There were times I did confess the sin of pornography, and I remember being told by a priest, it's fine, it's typical for men your age, which I didn't want to hear. I sort of wanted to be treated like a man, like a grown-up.
Well,
so I'll never forget the day one priest sat me down, he was a Dominican, and he said, Matthew, this is a rather terrible preparation for marriage, wouldn't you say? And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. But I was so happy that he was taking me seriously and treating me like a man.
Well, you think about it too, and you think about our Lord and the idea of committing an adultery and talking about adultery in your heart. Well, pornography in many ways is a perfect example of that.
Yes.
You know, in that way, basically one is committing adultery in their mind with someone. And Joe Mclean, from slavery to sonship, why did you start off the book with his? Is there a reason why his was the first story you told?
His is a very strong, powerful story. Joe was a Marine. He was introduced to pornography by his father. His father and him even shared pornography together. One of his girlfriends, he paid for her abortion. While she's getting an abortion, he's picking up women across the road. And when he finally had a conversion to Christ and got married, he said, I had to make the decision that I cannot pass on this inheritance to my children. It has to stop here. So it was a very powerful, moving story, and that's why we chose that for the first one.
Right, and he had a stepfather who was into pornography too after his father left, and as a teenager it was my mission in life to have as many sexual relationships as possible. Before graduating, I was trying to impress my father. He had countless girlfriends, and so would I. It's interesting too, because at the beginning when he talks about the girlfriend stuff, it was disturbing and upsetting for him as he got younger. And it's interesting how he responded to that deformation in his childhood by then basically mimicking the same bad behavior that his father had.
Yeah. It's addictive. You might be repulsed by the first images you see, but you're also intrigued. And unless you have someone to walk you through that experience, why it's natural to desire touch and intimacy, and even to have an extreme interest in the opposite sex. This is a good thing and a natural thing. And yet to have someone say, well, while that's good and sacred and God wants that, to objectify women is wrong, and this is why. Like to have someone guide you and navigate you through that.
And I think the reality is, and I think that's what the Dominican was saying to you, for whether you realized it or not, ultimately that was going to affect how you treated your wife.
Yeah, Luke, where is it? Like 22:19, Luke 22, I think so. Our Lord says, this is my body given up for you. Pornography, when you think about it, flips that on its head. We think this is your body taken by me. And so that's why I think we can truly say that pornography emasculates men, robbing them of the ability to be masculine and to give. And so instead of being protectors, they become predators, and ultimately, I think, dissatisfied.
Now, how did you get these people to agree to tell you their stories?
Well, because I've been working in this area for a long time and I have many friends, I reached out to a number of them who had these powerful stories of great sin but also great redemption, and asked them if they wouldn't mind sharing them. So most of the stories in here, the names attributed to the stories are the actual names, and some aren't. Some are pseudonyms, but yeah, I had a lot of people.
Now, you mentioned the name Audrey Assad, and talking about her story, it says she stumbled into pornography addiction at the age of 15. How did she stumble into it?
Well, I guess you wouldn't say she stumbled into pornography addiction, but the way she stumbled onto pornography was by being in the basement, flicking through channels, and all of a sudden seeing through the fuzz something like pornography. And so she was intrigued, and it felt good, and so she continued to do it in secret, feeling ashamed about it. I'm not sure even knowing what it was.
Was she picking up a channel that wasn't quite screened out or something?
That must have been the case.
Right, so she could just see the images vaguely.
Yep, and she got hooked. And then when she would bring this up in Sunday school class, they would say the same thing we said earlier. Oh, this is something that just men struggle with. And so she began to wonder, well, am I a lesbian?
Right,
am I a man in a woman's body? What's wrong with me?
Right.
And so I'm really thankful to Audrey for being so open and honest in this book, so that other young women can read this and be validated in their struggle.
The other one, April, that's the one you were talking about earlier?
That was June I was speaking of earlier.
Oh,
April is the former porn performer. She was in 14 different pornography videos.
I was going to say, because she was a stripper, but also in pornography.
That's right, she was in both. And so April's a good friend of mine, and by God's grace, she left the industry many years ago, and now is reaching out to those in the industry and trying to show them great love and compassion, that there's another way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Mike and Ann,
yes.
That's a couple.
Yeah, this is a powerful story. This is a husband and wife who write paragraph by paragraph about the hell they went through due to the husband's porn addiction.
And that's To Hell and Back, is that?
Indeed,
To Hell and Back,
yeah. Right. That's a beautiful story, very honest, very rich. And so if there's wives out there listening, this is a beautiful way to kind of get both sides of the story.
Now, were both addicted, or he was addicted?
Just he was addicted.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was that something that happened before they got married, or sometime later?
I think it was
after?
something that came into their marriage he may not have shared with his wife, and then it just escalated. And what happened is she talks about being frustrated as Mike was finding recovery, because here he was with this group of men, growing in holiness and growing in freedom from this stuff, and yet here she was with no one around her, and found herself even frustrated. And so I think it's important that we validate this anger, this righteous anger, and this hurt on the part of women whose husbands struggle with pornography.
And when he was struggling, what was her experience of that? How did that impact her?
She was just, I think all wives act differently, but she acted with great outrage and great hurt. And so for a long time they were convinced that they would end up getting a divorce. They would see therapists, and some therapists would say, well, this is your fault, Anne, because you should really be sleeping with your husband more or doing these things he's asking you to do. And she knew that wasn't right. And so it wasn't until she met a Catholic therapist that's when the healing,
and that's the problem you end up
in.
with too, because what happens is somebody watches this stuff, sees some of the bizarro stuff that's going on, and it decides that somehow this is natural, this is what people do. You know what I mean? When
that's exactly right.
It's not the case.
It kills marriages.
Right. What kind of a reaction have you gotten to the book?
Really good. We're selling the book for $2 in bulk. So for a box of 20, it's only $40. And so within, I think, 5 months, we've sold over 25,000 copies, and we're happy with that. And we've received a lot of great feedback from young people and old people alike.
And are parishes buying
these?
Dioceses buying them?
Well, part of our thought was an individual may feel he is incriminating himself by buying a book.
I gotcha.
But I know tons of priests and youth ministers who would feel fine incriminating entire congregations.
Right, okay.
And so they buy this by the box and they give them out. I have priests give them out at the confessional. And because they're personal stories of sin and recovery, they're easy to read and they're great. They're very hopeful. So.
Right, hopeful, I guess, is what's important
yes,
too.
Ultimately hopeful.
Is that you read these tough stories, but at the end of the day, you know it's going to work out. And so if it's hopeful for them, it's hopeful for somebody else.
Yeah, and I didn't want to write a book on the neurology of addiction, not only because I'm underqualified or not qualified to write a book on that, but a book of 10 short stories is kind of palatable for the porn addict who may be overstimulated and incapable of sitting down and reading a thick tome.
Right.
So I think this is bite-sized portions was a better way to go.
And when you go out and speak and you're at a reading, besides people coming up to you later, do you hear many times from the parishes or the priests, and certainly, we can hear it, who are in confession and hearing what's going on in people's lives and stuff like that, that this is a big problem?
Yeah, this is the #1 problem in America, maybe. I think this, along with contraception, are probably the fuel of the abortion industry. Because as we said earlier, it says, here's my pleasure without the sacrifice. So it's a mammoth problem. And we need to begin addressing it. We need to begin talking about it.
Now, is it a problem just in the United States, or what about Australia?
Anywhere that has access to internet. With the advent of the internet, pornography became accessible, affordable, and anonymous in a way that it had never been before. And so porn use skyrocketed. And so that's why I now work for Covenant Eyes, which is dedicated to helping families protect their children with this accountability and filtering software.
For on the web and everything?
Yeah, because I think without that, you've essentially given your child an X-rated movie theater. And so we just need to get, as intimidating as it may be, at least we know it's wrong, and we just need to begin taking the steps so our children don't get deeply harmed by this in their formative years, and then bring this stuff
and also realize the ability
marriage.
Of making it clear this isn't correct, but also if you run into these things, let's talk.
Yeah, indeed.
And let's get back. Very good. Thanks, Matt.
Thank
you for being so honest, and thank you for putting out a book like this called Delivered. Speaking with Matt Fradd, author of Delivered, True Stories of Men and Women Who Turned from Porn to Purity, featuring a foreword by Jason Everett. And this is EWTN's On Location programming from the Catholic Leadership Conference. Join us next time.